Before World War II, global trade in the way that we think of it today did not exist. There was no manufacturers trade, certainly not supply chains. Energy and agriculture tended to be kept in-house. If you wanted something, you went out and you took it, colonized it, you expanded into empire, and those empires clashed. Those clashes brought us the destruction of the world wars and the end of the imperial era. At the end of that conflict, the Americans proposed a new way of functioning. Instead of everyone having to have their own sequestered, protected, militarized, convoyed systems, the US would use its navy, which was the only one of size to survive the war, and would protect everyone's commerce everywhere at any time, no matter who you wanted to partner with, where you wanted to go, where you wanted to sell, if in exchange you would serve as cannon fodder in the Cold War. We bribed up an alliance, and it worked. But the Cold War ended 30 years ago, and we've been backing away ever since. And in every presidential election, we have gone with the more populist candidate, and I would not exclude Biden from that statement. We're done. And at the time that the Ukraine war started, we actually had fewer troops stationed abroad than at any time since Reconstruction. So the American commitment to this sort of structure, which was always a security structure for us, is now gone. Second, that structure changed the way we live. In a pre-World War II, pre-urbanized, pre-industrial system, everyone lived on the farm and kids were free labor, so you had a lot of them. But when globalization happened, urbanization happened, and everyone took those industrial and service jobs and manufacturing jobs in the cities. And when you move into a condo, kids are no longer free labor. They're just a really expensive headache. Adults aren't dumb, so we had fewer of them. You fast forward that 75 years, and it's not that we're running out of children. That happened 40 years ago. It's that we're running out of adults. And we do not have an economic theory for what a world where the retirees outnumber the children and the adults looks like. But we're about to live in the naked now. It feels good until now, because as you age, if you're part of a global system, if you have a lot of people in their 40s and 50s, people who have literally been in their careers their whole lives, well, they're very productive. But they've got to export that product in order to make it work. And in a globalized system, you can export from the more advanced aged economies into the younger ones. But that only works until you hit mass retirement. And at that point, you don't just have you don't only lack consumption, you also lack production and investment. And that is a position where the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, the Italians, the Belgians, the Germans, and more are all edging into in the first half of this decade. And there is no system that we are aware of, even theoretically, where that works. So we are now at the end of what has been the greatest period of economic growth in human history. And now we get to figure out what's next. We have 11 supercarriers, another 3 are on their way, fantastic tools for military power projection. But if you want to patrol the global oceans, you need destroyers. I would say you'd probably need about 800 of them. We have 70, and half of those are dedicated to protecting the carriers. It's also the 1960s anymore. The Soviets were never great at anything naval, but now there's a wide range of middle powers, of which China is one, who would like to have their own sphere of influence in terms of maritime power. And that is just not something that works in terms of unrestricted merchant activity. So even if the United States wanted to do this, we no longer have the capacity to do it. And nor is there a country or a coalition of countries that have the naval power that would be necessary to build some sort of Pax global system. We just have sailed past that, to put it bluntly. In terms of why it won't happen, the United States politically has moved on. And part of what made globalization work is that for the Americans, globalization was a security pact, not an economic one. Everyone else got the economic benefits. We got to be able to write everybody's security policies. That was the deal. You do that for 70 years, and economics change in the home country. And so we have seen the gradual departing of manufacturing, for example, from American shores to the wider world. We have seen countries that normally could not have built the institutional or physical infrastructure or industrial plant be able to do so because of global finance. And we've seen other players come into the market in terms of energy and agriculture that couldn't have done so in the imperial era except as colonies. They're all independent countries now. And there's some resentment in the United States. This is part of the rise of Donald Trump and Joe Biden, part of the return of populism to the core of our political debates. The idea that the United States has gotten a raw deal, even though the deal is one we made, even though it's one we pioneered. And the idea that the United States is going to build out a navy so it can bleed and die so that the Chinese can import raw materials and export machined products, that was always a dubious line. And so here we are at the end of the system. I would say when Ian and I first met, what was that, 8 years ago? Something like that. What he just laid out was one of my scenarios. That this could happen quickly, this could happen over a long period of time, there could be a transition period. Events of the last 8 years, however, have changed my mind on that. I've seen significant short-sightedness in foreign policy making in the United States and Europe, but most of all in China. I've seen a collapse of China's institutional capacity to process information, leading to ever and ever worse problems. And now we've got a little bit better demographic data that has come out of China, which is truly horrific. It's come out since the book published just a month ago. And we're now looking at a Chinese population that's less than half of what it is today as early as 2050. And in that sort of environment, China's just not competitive in anything. And that assumes there are no interruptions to the flows of stuff into China. So I have lost track of the number of clients that have come to me in a panic and wondering when things are going to go back to 2019, whether it's because of Trump or because of China. And I really don't have a lot of good news for them anymore. And just in the last 48 hours, I am very concerned about Germany's role. Now that Nord Stream is offline, we don't know if it's going back online. The last of the 4 pillars that support German industrialization manufacturing are in the process of crumbling. We have become so vulnerable in the last 8 years, and everything has become so exposed. And just the bedrock that allows globalization to function, the idea that materials, energy, food, and manufactured products, intermediate products in particular, can just flow effortlessly, that's all stopped. And when I look at a country with a terminal demography who has no control over its energy or its machine inputs, it does not take much of a breath to knock that over. And I think we're going to see in very real time, in just the next 3 months, just how bad this can get for Germany very quickly. And if we've got Germany and China in a degree of economic duress at more or less the same time, but for different reasons, I don't see how we pull out of this. I would love to be wrong. I would love for there to be a transition period where we have a chance to plan. But everything has gone so far with no mitigation that I think we're well past the point of no return now. I think it's its own variable, but demographics are perfectly capable of killing it all by itself. Either of these issues, from my point of view, are death blows, and having them both in roughly the same time frame is just really bad luck. I'd like to go back to something that Ian said about the Russians. I am not convinced that they're going to turn Nord Stream back on or not. I don't know. That's an internal Russian political move that it's entirely possible they haven't made the decision on. I am far more convinced that even if you put Nord Stream to the side for the moment, all of the pipes that traverse Belarus and Ukraine are ones that are probably not long for this world. It's difficult for me to see a Ukraine that believes it's losing the war to allow those to continue to operate. And I think one way or another, we're going to be seeing Russian energy fall off the market for a significant period of time.
Okay, disagree on that one.
And by significant, I mean decades. The last time the Russians, for whatever reason, had to shut in their oil, it was 1992 because their exports, their raw production was fine.